When I was a kid, I stumbled across a board game company that gave me a hobby to last me the rest of my days. I'm sure there are many others for whom their games mean a lot. That company is Avalon Hill, and here I will give you my list of my favorite 10 games that they ever released, here on Legendary Tactics. It is 1987, and my family is on the way home from our first trip down to Florida. As we headed up the I-75 on our way back to Canada, we stopped in Bowling Green, Ohio, to take a break and do a little shopping. I can't remember the name of the store, but when I wandered in, I came across a game that I'd never seen before that was actually designed to recreate historical events. It was not Monopoly, it was not Risk, and it definitely was not Candyland. It is a game that will be featured on this list. For the first time, I got a sense that games could be so much more than roll the dice and move, that you could step back in time and put yourself in the shoes of a general or an admiral to see if you would have made the same decisions given the same situation. I was fascinated. I bought that game for, I believe, $12 American, and that started a hobby that I've enjoyed and will enjoy for the rest of my life. My passion even eventually led to starting a YouTube channel, which you are watching right now. So I'd like to share with you my favorite 10 games from the days of paper catalogs, the General magazine, rules questions posed through snail mail, and amazing games which could be purchased for only $12 American. Most people know Starship Troopers from the movie that came out in the 90s. Not everyone knows that there was a book written by Robert Heinlein that inspired both the movie and this game. The movie was only loosely based on the book, and the game instead follows the events of the book much more closely. The Terran player must battle first the Skinnies, which were tall, slender aliens that were not very good in combat, and would then move on to battle the Arachnids, a race of ant-like aliens that live underground and pop out of nowhere to attack with deadly effect. I loved this game as a kid. The different scenarios told a neat story, chapter by chapter, starting with a raid on the Skinnies and building up to a giant battle on the Bugs' home planet at the end. The Terrans must move around on the map board, fully visible, but the Arachnids had a secret tunnel system that they can use to ambush. The Terran player's only defense is their armored battle suits, supported by flamethrowers, listening devices, nuclear weapons, and even psychics to sense the underground tunnel layout. It's a really neat game, if a bit cumbersome both in the rules and with the stacks and stacks of counters, but I have many happy memories of playing it. The next one might bring a smile to some people's faces. Outdoor Survival was apparently a game that was designed and produced purely on a bet, and ended up being one of their best sellers of all time. In fact, I've heard that many of the games were sold to dungeon masters who used the map board for their Dungeons & Dragons quests. The game itself is kind of ridiculous. Each scenario is different, but basically, for various reasons, each player must make their way across deadly natural terrain filled with hazards of all kinds, trying to, as the game title implies, survive. The first scenario is absolutely hilarious, and you can't imagine anyone seriously getting away with it today. It is supposed to recreate someone getting lost in the wild and having to make their way to safety. I never knew anyone who made it out alive. Instead, their character wandered around, basically randomly, wasting away until they collapsed and expired. It has an oddly fascinating allure. The other scenarios were better, more of a race against each other than about pure survival. For good measure, it actually included a little booklet with hints and tips on how to survive outdoors. I still remember ordering Afrika Korps for Christmas, likely in 1988. I was taking a great interest in history, and especially the North African theater during World War II. This game allowed me to recreate that fascinating series of battles. It was the first game I ever played where you had to worry about supply, both keeping your own troops fed, but also cutting the supply routes of your enemy. It was the classic matchup of Rommel versus Montgomery. The game is fun, although perhaps a little bit long, and who doesn't remember the build-up for the attack on Tobruk? It had to happen every game. An amazing game, recreating an amazing part of history. I also owned Panzer Army Afrika, which is the first and possibly last game I've ever seen where pieces have movement point allowances between 40 and 60. But I have to give the edge to this classic, and that's why it's on my list. I picked up B-17, Queen of the Skies, a bit later in my high school years. This is a game that is known as a procedural. There aren't a lot of big decisions to be made. You load up your plane with a crew and it gets sent on various missions against targets in France or Germany. Enemy planes attack in relentless waves. Endless charts are consulted. Damage is taken, crew members are wounded or killed. The goal is to get through 25 missions with your bomber, an almost impossible task. Even though the player doesn't have much agency, each game tells a fascinating story that will bring you back again and again. You really feel what it was like to be a cog in the machine, a single plane in a whole formation of bombers that really didn't have much more that they could do other than sit tight, take the hits, and shoot back like crazy. But there's something about it that is just so much fun. Diplomacy. Everyone has a story of how it ruined a friendship, and I do as well. I ran a game in high school where one friend backstabbed the other, probably at my urging, and they stopped speaking for at least 2 weeks. My colleague here at Legendary Tactics, Flash, played France in that game, and I ended up winning as Turkey. It is a truly amazing gaming experience, and everyone should try it at least once. I've always thought that it is a truly unique design that is often mimicked but never surpassed. Up Front was a game that I played with my friend Mark many times through high school. It really is a fascinating and innovative game, basically an attempt to recreate squad-level combat with only cards at a time when games like this were purely done with hex and counter. I loved the abstract nature of the terrain, the drama of the fire card draws, and all the different abilities each nation had. The rules were a bit clunky once you got to things like close combat and infiltration, as well as the vehicles, but the basic design is absolute genius. And now we finally arrive at the game which started it all, Bismarck. My poor father had to play this repeatedly with me, even though it held very little interest for him. The game tells a tale of cat and mouse. The Bismarck, one of the most powerful battleships of the German Navy, must sneak past a search net composed of the entire British Navy and a bunch of their Air Force, get to the convoy routes, sink a few convoys, and get home safely. The British must stop and sink it at almost any cost. The basic game here is more than enough to generate real drama and excitement. Some of the intermediate rules are great as well, and the advanced game brings a rule set that is really similar to another Avalon Hill game, Jutland. It essentially uses miniatures rules to recreate the naval battles on your hardwood floor. This game is hard to find, but a lot of fun. I have always had a soft spot for Gettysburg 88. I just find that the game is so easy to learn and play, but the mechanics recreate the battle so well and give you a real sense of what it might have been like to command an army at that time. I love it when a game gives you the freedom to do what you want, but you end up doing what the commanders did historically, simply because it really is the best decision for your side. This is a perfect example of how a beer and pretzels wargame can still have the excitement, drama, and strategic depth to keep you coming back for more. In the early 90s, I got into baseball. I mean, really into baseball. I would buy magazines of stats and learn all the players for every team. Anyone remember Baseball Weekly? I'd follow the standings and scores as best I could and cheer my local Toronto Blue Jays to World Series victories in 1992 and 1993. And when I wasn't actually playing baseball, I would play it on my tabletop using this game, Status Pro Baseball. I loved how close the gameplay seemed to real life. There weren't a lot of decisions to be made, but there were enough that you could feel like the manager of a team, guiding them through a season. And because you could play a game in about 10 or 15 minutes, you could always fire up a new one and give it another go. And finally, my number one Avalon Hill game is Squad Leader. I'm sure there are people that will tell me that Advanced Squad Leader is the superior game, and they are probably right. But when I was in high school, I didn't have the money or the inclination to buy ASL, which basically meant buying a giant binder of rules and then buying the modules so you could actually play. Squad Leader had everything in one box. Is it a perfect game? No, but it is an incredible one. The way that everything meshes together to recreate squad-level combat is so impressive. I love the fact that leadership plays such a big role, that line of sight is so varied and complex, that most units panic and run instead of being eliminated. The scope of it is really majestic, but the rules are not so complicated that they get in the way. For me, this was the best Avalon Hill game that I ever played. So, there's my list. I'm sure that you have yours, and I would love to hear about it in the comments section below. While you're there, please add a like and subscribe if you could, as it helps us out a lot. And check out some of the content that we have on Avalon Hill Games, like Diplomacy. As we grow the channel, we're going to be adding a lot more content about these oldies but goodies, and we hope that you will join us for the ride, and perhaps discover a game you never knew existed before. Thank you so much for watching, and for joining me on this trip down memory lane. This is NATO with Legendary Tactics.